Some doors stay sealed for a reason. Not to keep people out, but to keep something in. In March 2019, a restoration crew working beneath the old palace quarter in Istanbul broke through a wall that had been sealed since 1565. Behind it, they found a circular chamber carved from bedrock. 22 bodies arranged in a perfect circle, hands clasped, faces lifted upward. All women, all perfectly preserved. The air that escaped when they opened it smelled like burning wax and something else, something sweet and chemical that made their stomachs turn. But what made the crew flee wasn't the bodies, it was the sound. Faint singing in Latin, coming from mouths that hadn't drawn breath in over 400 years. The site was sealed again within hours. Every worker was transferred to different projects across the city. The location was removed from official restoration plans. But one man, a structural engineer named Kemal Demir, couldn't let it go. He'd seen something in that chamber that the others missed. Symbols carved into every surface, warnings written in blood, and a wooden cross at the center that was still warm to the touch. 3 weeks after the chamber was sealed, Kemal went back alone. What he found would destroy everything he thought he understood about death, faith, and the space between them. The story begins, not in 2019, but in 1565. The year Ottoman soldiers discovered a hidden convent beneath Constantinople that had been sealed for over a century. The empire had conquered the city in 1453, converting churches to mosques and dissolving religious orders. But this convent had vanished from all records. When construction workers building a new mosque complex broke through its roof by accident, military units were sent to investigate. What they found inside made hardened soldiers refuse to return. 27 women kneeling in a circle, perfectly preserved, despite being dead for over 100 years. Their habits were intact. Their skin showed no decay. They looked like they'd fallen asleep mid-prayer. But the walls told a different story. Every surface was covered in writing, scratched into stone with fingernails, and written in what appeared to be blood. The messages were in Greek, Latin, and languages the soldiers couldn't identify. They all said the same thing in different ways. Do not open. The seal must hold. We died to keep it contained. If you break the circle, it will wake. The military commander, a man named Hassan, ordered his scribes to document everything. Among the bodies, they found a lead box wrapped in chains, covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The box was sealed with wax that bore no imperial mark, just strange circular patterns that seemed to shift when you stared at them too long. Hassan's orders were clear: catalog and remove anything of value. The lead box was clearly significant. He instructed 2 soldiers to lift it carefully for transport to palace scholars. The moment they touched it, the temperature dropped, torches flickered, despite no wind, and one of the bodies moved, just slightly, her head tilted up, eyes still closed, mouth still shut. But her head turned, tracking the soldiers' movement like she could sense them despite being dead. Then all 27 heads lifted at once, all facing the doorway, all tracking the men, with sightless eyes. Their mouths moved silently, forming the same words over and over. You should have left it sealed. Hassan and his men ran. They abandoned the lead box and fled to the surface. Within 2 days, the entrance was filled with stone and mortar. The entire stairway was sealed solid. The Sultan's vizier, when he heard the report, revealed something that made Hassan's blood run cold. That box had been opened once before. In 1096, right before the First Crusade, 12,000 people died in 3 days. Pope Urban II himself ordered it sealed and assigned Byzantine nuns to guard it. 27 virgins maintaining an eternal vigil, their pure faith creating a barrier against something that shouldn't exist in the world. When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, the nuns knew they couldn't let the relic fall into hands that didn't understand its danger. They sealed themselves underground with it, chose to starve to death together while maintaining their prayer circle. Because if the ritual broke, if even one of them stopped praying before the others died, whatever was in that box would wake. They lasted 7 months underground. 7 months of prayer written on walls in their own blood as they grew weaker. until finally, all 27 failed at once, and the ritual ended. But the containment held. Barely. The vizier ordered the site sealed permanently and all records classified. Hassan was transferred to a distant province. He never spoke of what he'd seen again. When he died 30 years later, his personal journals were filed in the imperial archives under restricted military reports. They sat there for 400 years, unread and forgotten, while the city above grew and changed and forgot what slept beneath its streets. Until March 2019, when Kemal Demir and his restoration crew broke through the wall. Kemal was 42 years old, a structural engineer who'd worked on restoration projects across Istanbul for 15 years. He was pragmatic, educated, not religious. He'd explored Byzantine cisterns, Ottoman tombs, Greek foundations. He'd seen human remains before. They didn't bother him. He understood that Istanbul was built on layers of history, that breaking through to forgotten spaces was part of the job. When the wall gave way that Tuesday morning, he was the first one through the opening. The smell hit him immediately. Old incense mixed with something chemical. His flashlight swept across the chamber and he saw them. 22 women arranged in a perfect circle, sitting upright against the wall. They wore dark religious habits, Byzantine style, incredibly well preserved. But the air felt wrong. Too warm, too heavy, like the space was holding its breath. He called for his team. 5 other workers crowded into the chamber, their lights crisscrossing in the darkness. That's when they noticed the walls. Every surface was covered in carvings, crosses, flames, words in languages they couldn't read. And underneath everything, darker stains that might have been blood. One of the workers, a young man named Emre, approached the nearest body. He reached out to touch her hand, curious about the preservation. The moment his fingers made contact, her mouth opened. Not wide, just slightly, like she was drawing breath. Emre jerked back. Everyone froze. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then they heard it. Singing. Faint. Distant. Like it was coming from very far away. But they were underground in a sealed chamber. The sound had nowhere to come from except the bodies themselves. The voices were singing in Latin. The melody was haunting, beautiful, the kind of hymn that belongs in cathedrals at dawn. But there was something wrong with it. The pitch was slightly off, the rhythm just irregular enough to make your skin crawl. And it was getting louder. Kemal ordered everyone out immediately. His team didn't argue. They scrambled for the opening, pushing past each other in their hurry to escape. But Kemal hesitated. His engineer's mind needed to understand what was causing the sound. Air pressure? Acoustic resonance from the excavation work above? There had to be a rational explanation. He swept his light across the chamber one more time. At the center of the circle of bodies was a stone pedestal. On it sat something wrapped in decayed cloth. He moved closer, drawn by professional curiosity. The singing grew louder, surrounding him. He could make out words now. Lux in tenebris. Light in darkness. Over and over. His hands were shaking as he lifted the cloth. Beneath it was a lead box, ancient and heavy, covered in symbols. It was warm. Not just room. Temperature. Actually warm. Like something alive was generating heat inside it. He dropped the cloth and backed away. Every instinct screamed at him to leave. But before he turned, he noticed something carved into the pedestal base. Modern lettering. Recent. Someone had been here before and left a message. He knelt down, brushing away dust. The carving was in Turkish, dated 1847. This chamber has been opened 3 times. Each time, the seal weakens. Do not open the box. Do not touch the bodies. Do not stay longer than necessary. The dead are praying to keep something contained. If they stop, it wakes. Below that, another message in different handwriting, dated 1962. I heard them singing. I didn't believe the warnings. Now they sing in my dreams. I cannot make them stop. I hear them when I'm alone. I hear them in the silence between my thoughts. God help me. They won't let me forget. Kemal's throat went dry. He scrambled backwards, away from the pedestal. The singing was so loud now, it felt like it was inside his skull. He ran for the opening, squeezed through, and ordered his crew to seal it immediately. Bring concrete. Bring steel reinforcement. Seal it now. Within 6 hours, the opening was filled and reinforced. Kemal filed his report with the Ministry of Culture, describing an unstable chamber containing human remains that posed a structural risk. He recommended permanent sealing and removal from restoration plans. The ministry approved without question. They'd seen similar recommendations before. Istanbul's underground was full of forgotten crypts that were better left undisturbed. Kemal tried to forget about it. He moved on to other projects. But 3 days later, he woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of singing. The same Latin hymn, the same off-key melody. It was coming from somewhere in his apartment. He searched every room. Nothing. The sound seemed to move, always just out of reach, always just faint enough that he couldn't pinpoint its source. He told himself it was stress, auditory hallucinations from working too many long shifts. He saw a doctor who prescribed sleep medication. It didn't help. The singing continued every night at exactly 2 a.m. Always the same time. Always the same song. After 2 weeks, Kemal was barely sleeping. Dark circles hollowed his eyes. His hands shook from exhaustion. His wife begged him to see a specialist, suggested it might be tinnitus or a neurological issue. But Kemal knew what it was. The chamber had gotten inside his head somehow. He needed to understand why. He went to the university library and started researching. Ottoman military records, Byzantine religious orders, Christian relics brought back from the Crusades. Most documents were fragmentary, but he found references. A sealed convent discovered in 1565. 27 bodies perfectly preserved. Warnings written in blood. A lead box that predated Christianity itself. Something found in Jerusalem that should have stayed buried. The reports all ended the same way. The chamber was sealed. All witnesses were transferred. No further investigation recommended. But Kemal found something else, a pattern. The chamber had been opened 4 times throughout history. 1,000, 565, 1,847, 1,962, and now 2019. Each time, the person who led the excavation reported hearing voices afterward. In 1565, the military commander Hassan wrote in his journal about prayers that followed him for the rest of his life. In 1847, an Ottoman archaeologist disappeared 3 months after entering the chamber. His last diary entry simply repeated the phrase, lux in tenebris, hundreds of times, filling 30 pages. In 1962, a structural engineer named Mehmet Özkan was part of the team that rediscovered the chamber during foundation work. He sealed it again and filed a report recommending it remain closed. 6 weeks later, he walked into the Bosphorus and drowned. His suicide note contained only Latin phrases and crude drawings of women kneeling in circles. Kemal stared at the records, his heart pounding. 3 excavations, 3 men who'd entered the chamber, all of them destroyed by what they found, and now he was the 4th. That night, when the singing started at 2 a.m., Kemal didn't try to find its source. Instead, he listened carefully. Beneath the Latin hymn, he could hear something else, whispers in Turkish. He strained to make out the words. They were calling his name. Kemal, you opened the door. You broke the seal. The circle is weakening. We can't hold it much longer. You have to help us. You have to go back. The voices were desperate, pleading. They didn't sound threatening. They sounded terrified. Kemal sat up in bed, fully awake now. His wife slept beside him, undisturbed. Only he could hear them. He whispered into the darkness, "Help you? How? What do you want from me?" The singing stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, a single voice spoke. Young, female, speaking Turkish with an ancient accent. We are the guardians. We died to maintain the seal. But we are fading. Too much time has passed. Too many have opened the chamber and left without understanding. The containment is failing. Every time someone enters and leaves, they weaken it. You must return. You must complete the circle. 22 bodies remain. 27 are needed. 5 more must join us willingly. 5 must choose to stay and pray until death, or the seal breaks completely. Kemal felt ice flood through his veins. You're asking me to die down there? To seal myself in and starve like you did? The voice continued, emotionless, not asking, warning. If the seal breaks, what is inside will wake. It feeds on perception, on attention, on faith corrupted. It grows stronger every time someone knows it exists. Already it has touched you. You hear us singing because you have become part of the circle whether you accept it or not. You will hear us until you join us, or until the seal breaks and we all fail together. Kemal spent the next 2 days trying to rationalize what he'd heard. Hallucinations, exhaustion, carbon monoxide poisoning from the sealed chamber affecting his brain. But deep down he knew the truth. Something in that chamber was real, something that defied everything he believed about the world. On the 3rd night, he went back to the site. The opening had been sealed with concrete and steel as he'd ordered, but he had access to the construction equipment. He could open it again. He stood in front of the sealed wall for an hour, debating. If he opened it, he might find proof that would explain everything, or he might make things worse. Finally, he turned and walked away. He couldn't do it. Couldn't risk weakening the seal further. But the singing didn't stop. It grew louder, night after night, 2 a.m. without fail. The voices became more desperate. Kemal, please. We are failing. Can you feel it? The box is warming. The wax is cracking. It's waking up. You must help us. We cannot hold it alone anymore. Kemal stopped going to work. He couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. His wife threatened to have him hospitalized if he didn't seek help. He agreed to see a psychiatrist who diagnosed severe anxiety and prescribed antipsychotics. The medication dulled the edges of reality, but didn't stop the voices. They just became harder to distinguish from his own thoughts. He started researching obsessively. Ancient containment rituals. The concept of virgin guardians, maintaining seals against evil. He learned that the practice appeared across cultures. Vestal virgins in Rome, temple priestesses in Greece, sacred guardians in Sumerian texts. The pattern was always the same. Certain entities required watchers who'd never been physically corrupted. Pure bodies and pure faith creating a barrier against forces that predated organized religion. The nuns in the chamber weren't just victims. They were soldiers in a war that had been fought for thousands of years. A war against something humanity had found in the deep places of the world and wisely chosen to seal away rather than understand. 1 month after opening the chamber, Kemal made a decision. He would go back, not to open it fully, but to drill a small hole, just enough to insert a camera and recording equipment. If he could document what was actually inside, prove that the voices were real or prove they weren't, he could end this nightmare one way or another. He waited until midnight when the construction site was empty, brought a portable drill and fiber optic camera from his equipment stock. The sealed wall was thick, but he knew exactly where the chamber lay behind it. It took 40 minutes to drill through. When the bit finally broke through into the space beyond, warm air rushed out. The smell of incense and decay flooded the tunnel. He fed the camera through the hole and turned on his monitor. The screen flickered to life, showing the chamber interior in green night vision. The bodies were still there, arranged in their circle. But they'd moved. Not drastically, not obviously, but they were facing the drill hole now. All 22 heads turned toward his camera, looking directly at it with closed eyes. Their mouths were open. Kemal's hands trembled as he adjusted the camera. He could see the pedestal at the center. The lead box was exactly as he remembered, but the cloth covering it had fallen away completely. The wax seals on the box were cracked, not broken, but compromised. Whatever was inside had been pressing against them for 400 years, slowly, patiently weakening the containment. Through his headphones, connected to the camera's audio feed, he heard the singing clearly now. It wasn't coming from all the bodies. Only 3 were singing. The others sat in silence, mouths open but no sound emerging. The singing 3 were clustered together on one side of the circle. The gap where the other 5 should have been was obvious now that he was looking for it. 22 bodies. 27 were needed. The voice had told him the truth. The circle was incomplete. Kemal watched for 10 minutes, recording everything. Then, one of the bodies moved deliberately. This time, a woman on the far side of the circle slowly raised her hand and pointed. Not at the camera, at the box. Her finger trembled as if the effort to move was nearly impossible. Then she pointed at Kemal's camera. Then back at the box. The message was clear. The box was the threat. And somehow, Kemal was connected to it now. He pulled the camera out and sealed the drill hole with quick-setting epoxy. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He drove home in silence, the video file saved on his laptop. When he got to his apartment, he locked himself in his office and watched the footage again, frame by frame, looking for any detail he'd missed. At timestamp 8:34, he saw it. The lead box was vibrating, just slightly, a rhythmic pulse that matched the cadence of the singing. And carved into the side of the box, barely visible, under centuries of oxidation, was text. He enhanced the image, adjusted the contrast. The words became clear, ancient Greek. He copied them and ran them through translation software. The text read, "To open is to perceive is to feed is to release. Blessed are the blind who cannot see. Blessed are the deaf who cannot hear. Blessed are the dead who cannot know. For knowledge is the door through which it enters." Kemal stared at the screen. The warning was clear. The thing in the box fed on being known. Every person who learned of its existence made it stronger. Every thought about it, every moment of attention, every attempt to understand it, gave it power. That's why the nuns had sealed themselves away. That's why they'd starved to death while praying. They were creating a closed loop. 27 minds focused entirely on containment, refusing to let their attention wander to what they were containing. When they died, the loop ended, but by then they'd weakened it. Enough through starvation that it fell dormant. The seal held as long as no one else knew about it. But now people knew. Kemal knew. His crew knew. And according to the warnings, every time someone learned about it and walked away, they created a crack in the containment. They became part of its perception network, feeding it, strengthening it, making it easier for it to influence the world. Kemal was feeding it right now, by researching it, by thinking about it, by trying to understand it. The next morning, his wife found him sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. She begged him to go to the hospital. He refused. Instead, he wrote down everything he knew. The history, the warnings, the pattern. He compiled it into a document and saved multiple copies in different locations. Then, he made a decision that terrified him more than anything else. He was going back to the chamber. Not to study it, not to document it, but to stay. The voices were right. The circle needed 5 more. He could be one of them. He could complete what the nuns had started. His wife tried to stop him when he left that evening. He kissed her forehead and told her he was just going for a walk to clear his head. She'd find the document later. She'd understand eventually why he did what he did. Or maybe she'd just think he'd gone insane. Either way, he couldn't explain it to her. Couldn't risk pulling her into the perception network by making her know what he knew. He drove to the construction site, used his access card to enter. The sealed wall was exactly as he'd left it. But this time he brought real equipment. A jackhammer, proper lights, tools to break through the barrier he'd built. It took 3 hours to reopen the chamber. Every blow of the hammer felt like a decision he couldn't take back. When the hole was finally large enough to crawl through, he paused. The singing had stopped. The chamber beyond was completely silent. He'd brought no camera this time, no recording equipment, just a flashlight, a bottle of water, and a small bag with a few days of food. Not much, not enough to sustain him long. That was intentional. He squeezed through the opening and dropped into the chamber. His flashlight beam swept across the space. The bodies were facing him, all 22. Their eyes were still closed, but their heads tracked his movement. Following the light, he approached the circle slowly. Up close, he could see details he'd missed before. Their fingers were worn down to bone from scratching prayers into the walls. Their habits were stained with old blood. They'd written their warnings while dying, using the only ink they had left. He walked to the gap in the circle, the space where 5 should have been sitting. The stone floor there was different, smoother, like it had been worn down by bodies that were no longer present. He sat down, his back against the cold wall, folded his hands in his lap, and began to pray. The words didn't come easily. He wasn't religious, hadn't been to mosque in 20 years, but he remembered prayers from childhood. He whispered them into the darkness. Allahu Akbar, Bismillah. Any words that meant surrender to something greater than himself. The moment he began, the bodies around him reacted. Their mouths opened in unison. The singing resumed. Lux in tenebris, light in darkness. But now Kamal could feel what the words meant, not just hear them. He could feel the purpose behind the prayer. These women weren't asking for salvation. They were building a wall. Every word of prayer was another brick. Every moment of faith was mortar. They were constructing a barrier between the box at the center and the world outside. And that barrier could only be maintained by conscious, continuous effort. The moment attention wavered, the moment doubt crept in, the wall weakened. Kemal understood now why it required virgins. Not because physical purity had magical properties, but because they'd found through centuries of trial and error that people who'd never experienced certain physical intimacies were better able to maintain single-minded focus. Their minds hadn't been open to certain desires that could pull attention away from the task. He also understood why there had to be 27. One mind alone would break under the strain, would sleep, would wander, would eventually fail. But 27 minds, working in rotation, supporting each other, maintaining the prayer even when individuals faltered, that created redundancy. That created a system that could sustain itself for years if necessary. The nuns had maintained it for 7 months while starving to death. How long could he maintain it? How long before his mind broke or his body failed? Hours passed, or maybe days. Time became meaningless in the darkness. Kemal's voice grew hoarse from prayer. His throat burned. He drank water sparingly. Ate nothing. Food would only prolong the process, and prolonging meant more time for doubt to creep in. Better to burn fast and completely than to slowly fail. The singing around him never stopped. The bodies didn't need to breathe anymore, so they never paused. The sound became a constant pressure inside his skull. He could feel the barrier now, could sense it like a physical presence, a membrane stretched between the box and the outside world, thin, fragile, held together only by will and word. And he could feel what was inside the box pressing against that membrane. It wasn't a physical thing. It was attention itself, pure, malevolent consciousness that grew stronger every time someone thought about it, every time someone tried to understand it. It had been sleeping for centuries, contained by walls of faith and ignorance. But now it was waking, because people knew about it again, because Kemal had opened the chamber and looked inside, because his crew had seen the bodies, because he'd researched and documented and tried to understand. Every action had fed it. Every moment of knowledge had made it real in a way it hadn't been while forgotten. Kemal prayed harder, tried to empty his mind of everything except the words, but images kept intruding. His wife's face, his apartment, sunlight on the Bosphorus, memories of life pulling him back toward the world he was leaving behind. Each memory was a crack in his focus. Each thought that wasn't prayer weakened the barrier. He could feel it bending, could feel the thing inside the box pressing harder. It knew he was here now, knew he was trying to contain it, and it was fighting back. Days passed, or what felt like days. Kemal's sense of time dissolved completely. His throat was ruined from prayer. His voice came out as barely a whisper now. His body was shutting down from dehydration despite the water he'd brought. He'd stopped eating entirely on the second day. Hunger was a distraction he couldn't afford. The singing around him had changed. New voices had joined. He realized with distant horror that some of the bodies weren't just moving their mouths anymore. They were actually singing. Air that hadn't existed in their lungs for centuries was somehow passing through their throats, creating sound that shouldn't be possible. They were helping him. Or maybe they were consuming him. Maybe by joining the circle, he'd given them permission to pull life force from him to sustain their own maintained existence. Maybe that's what the ritual required. New guardians sacrificing themselves to give the old guardians a few more years of existence. A relay race of souls stretching across centuries. Then, on what might have been the fifth day, Kemal heard new footsteps. Someone was coming down the tunnel. His crew had found the reopened chamber. He could hear voices calling his name. Flashlight beams played across the walls. No. No, no, no. If they came in, if they saw what he was doing, they'd try to save him. They'd pull him out. Break his focus. Shatter the barrier he'd been building. He tried to shout a warning, but no sound came out. His voice was gone. The footsteps got closer. Light flooded the chamber. 3 of his crew members appeared at the opening. They saw him sitting in the circle of bodies, hands folded, lips moving silently. They saw the lead box at the center, its seals cracked and weeping, some kind of dark fluid. They saw the bodies around him with their eyes open now. Actually, open. Staring at the intruders with milky, dead eyes. The 3 workers screamed and ran. Kemal felt the barrier shudder. The attention of 3 new minds had just touched the box. 3 more sources of perception feeding it, making it real, making it stronger. The cracks in the wax seals widened. He could see light coming from inside the box now. Not physical light, something else, something that hurt to perceive. His prayer intensified, words tumbling out in a desperate stream. Arabic, Turkish, Latin, any language of faith he could remember. The bodies around him joined him, their voices rising to a shriek. 22 dead throats screaming prayers into the darkness. The box shook. The light inside grew brighter. Kemal could feel it looking at him now. Not seeing, looking, perceiving, understanding. It knew his name, knew his life, knew everything he'd ever feared, or loved, or believed, and it was using that knowledge against him. His wife's face appeared in his mind, screaming, burning, dying because he'd failed to contain this thing. The vision wasn't real. He knew it wasn't real, but it felt real. And that feeling pulled his attention away from prayer for just a moment. That moment was enough. The wax seal on the box split open completely with a sound like breaking glass. The light inside blazed. Kemal threw his hands up to shield his eyes, but the light wasn't physical. It poured directly into his mind. And in that light he saw what the box contained, saw what the nuns had died to keep sealed, saw what would happen if it reached the world outside. It wasn't a demon, wasn't a monster. It was an idea, a thought that should never have been thought, something humanity had discovered in ancient times and immediately recognized as an existential threat, not to their bodies, but to their minds. A concept that, once understood, changed you, corrupted the fundamental way you perceived reality, made you see truth in a way that unraveled sanity itself. The nuns hadn't been containing a physical threat. They'd been containing knowledge, pure, toxic knowledge that spread like a virus through every mind that encountered it. That's why virgin guardians were required, not for purity of body, but for purity of mind. People who'd structured their entire existence around faith in something absolute. People whose worldview was so rigid, so complete, that this corrupting knowledge couldn't find purchase. Kemal understood now why the warnings said, "To perceive is to feed." Every person who learned about the box, every mind that tried to understand what was inside, became a vector for the idea to spread. They didn't have to open the box physically. Just thinking about it, just knowing it existed, that was enough. The idea would seep into them, change them, and they'd pass it to others through their actions, their words, their presence in the world. A plague of understanding that would spread until everyone knew. And once everyone knew, once the idea had infected all of humanity, something would change. Some fundamental structure of reality would shift. The box had been created as a containment vessel, a way to trap the idea in physical form. The lead blocked it from escaping. The wax seals inscribed with prayers disrupted its ability to communicate. But containment was never permanent. The idea was patient. It waited for the seals to weaken, for guardians to die, for curious people to find it and wonder what was inside. Every opening created a crack. Every mind that perceived it widened that crack, until finally, inevitably, someone would understand it completely. And understanding was release. Kamal was understanding it now. The light from the box was pouring the idea directly into his consciousness. He could feel it taking root, changing the way he perceived space, time, causality, making him see patterns in reality that couldn't be unseen, patterns that revealed terrible truths about the nature of existence itself. He screamed. No sound came out, but the bodies around him screamed for him. Their voices rose in a final desperate prayer, not to their Christian God, not to Allah, to nothing, to silence itself, begging for the mercy of unknowing. And somehow, impossibly, the prayer worked. The light flickered, the box shuddered, the idea recoiled like it had been struck. For just a moment, the barrier reformed. Kamal slumped against the wall. His mind was shattered. He'd seen too much, understood too much, but in that understanding, he'd found the answer. The only way to truly contain the box. Complete erasure, not just sealing it away, but removing all knowledge of its existence from human consciousness, making sure no one ever looked for it, ever wondered what it contained, ever tried to understand. With the last of his strength, Kamal began a different prayer, not for containment, for forgetting. He prayed that when he died here, the chamber would collapse, that the earth would swallow it completely, that everyone who'd seen it would forget, that records would be lost, that history would erase this place and everything in it. The nuns around him understood. Their singing changed. The Latin words shifted into something older, something that sounded like the reverse of language, the uncreating of meaning. The room began to shake. Small at first, then stronger. The walls cracked. Dust fell from the ceiling. Kamal closed his eyes. His prayer continued silently, his lips moving, though no sound emerged. He felt the bodies around him beginning to crumble. 4 centuries of preservation finally giving way. They were releasing themselves from their vigil, allowing death to claim them completely, trusting that this final prayer would work where all others had only delayed. The ceiling gave way. Stone crashed down, the chamber filled with debris and darkness. In the moment before everything went black, Kamal opened his eyes one last time. The box was sinking, not falling, sinking. The floor beneath it had turned liquid, pulling it down into earth that shouldn't exist below. The light inside was fading, going dim, being swallowed by something older than the idea it contained. Something that had been waiting beneath Istanbul since before humans built their first city. Something that knew how to unmake what should never have been made. Then, silence. Complete and absolute. Above ground, the construction site collapsed into a sinkhole, 40 feet of earth and stone crashing down into the void. Emergency crews arrived within hours. They found no bodies, no evidence anyone had been inside when it collapsed. The site was condemned and filled with concrete. Within a year, a garden was planted over it. People walked there every day, never knowing what lay beneath their feet. Kamal's wife reported him missing. Police investigated but found no trace. His car was discovered near the construction site, empty. His laptop contained research about Ottoman history and Byzantine relics, but nothing that explained where he'd gone. After 3 months, he was declared dead in absentia. His wife moved away from Istanbul. She never spoke about the strange document he'd left behind, the one filled with warnings about sealed chambers and containment rituals. She burned it without reading it completely. Something about the words made her head hurt, made her want to forget. So she did. The construction crew that had entered the chamber with Kamal, they all requested transfers within a week, moved to different cities, different countries. None of them stayed in touch. When asked, years later about that project, they claimed not to remember, said they'd worked on dozens of sites that year and couldn't keep them straight. Maybe they were lying. Maybe the prayer of forgetting had worked. Maybe their minds had protected them by erasing what they'd seen. The Ministry of Culture's records showed that restoration project had been canceled due to structural instability. No mention of chambers, or bodies, or lead boxes. Just a routine site assessment that determined the area was unsafe for further work. The files were archived and forgotten. Over the years, other construction happened nearby. Foundations were laid, tunnels were dug, but nothing ever broke through to the collapsed chamber. Every drill that got close would mysteriously malfunction. Every excavation would hit unexpected bedrock. The earth itself seemed to be protecting what lay buried there, or maybe imprisoning it. 5 years passed, then 10. Istanbul grew and changed. The garden built over the collapsed site became a popular spot for tourists. People took photos there, ate lunch on the grass, never suspecting what they sat upon. And beneath them, in darkness that no light had touched since the collapse, something waited. Not the box. The box was gone, pulled down into places where even ideas couldn't survive. But the memory remained, faint, growing fainter, soon to be extinct completely. 20 years after Kemal's disappearance, his wife died of natural causes. She was the last person who'd known anything concrete about what he'd found. With her death, living memory ended. All that remained were scattered fragments. An archived report here, a briefly noted sinkhole there, nothing connecting them, nothing suggesting they were anything more than random historical accidents. And in the earth beneath Istanbul, in the space where the chamber once existed, there was only silence. The bodies had crumbled to dust centuries ago. The walls had collapsed. The carvings were buried under tons of, quote, stone. No one prayed there anymore. No one maintained the barrier. But the barrier held anyway, because everyone had forgotten. And forgetting is the strongest seal of all. Some knowledge isn't meant to be preserved. Some truths aren't meant to survive. Some doors shouldn't just be locked. They should be unmade, so that no one even remembers they were ever doors to begin with. The garden still stands today. People still visit. Sometimes, on quiet nights, if you press your ear to the ground, you might hear something faint, almost like singing. But probably it's just the sound of water moving through ancient pipes beneath the city, or wind through the grass, or your imagination filling silence with meaning, because humans can't help but seek patterns in the void. Better not to wonder. Better not to investigate. Better to enjoy the sunlight and the flowers and the normal peaceful day and never think about what might be sleeping underneath. Because the thing about sealed chambers, the thing about contained threats, the seal only works as long as no one tries to open it. And the best way to ensure no one opens it is to make sure no one remembers it exists at all.